Thank you, Dr. Prasad. That was a really fascinating talk. I don't think I've heard a global health talk span and provide so many examples of what should be done. Our second speaker is Britt Cruz. She's a program manager in international development with HealthPartners, the largest consumer-governed nonprofit healthcare organization in the US. Britt has spent the last 5 years working on HealthPartners' USAID-funded cooperative development program in Uganda. She will give you a glimpse of this effort. Please welcome Britt to the stage.
Wonderful. Hi, good afternoon. I'm really happy to have heard that last presentation because everything I'm going to be talking about in the next 20 minutes fits into Global Health 3.0. Phew. Looks like we're on the right path. My name is Britt Cruz. Like they said, I work for HealthPartners International Development. I'm going to be talking to you about Ugandan health cooperatives. I'll spend the first half talking about the cooperatives themselves, and then the second half talking a little bit about the lessons we've learned in the last 5 or so years. As was mentioned, we are the largest consumer-governed nonprofit healthcare organization in the United States. We're what's called an integrated healthcare organization, so we have both insurance as well as healthcare. We also have components of research and education. As you see there, we have over 90 clinics and hospitals and almost 2 million members. So that's HealthPartners domestically. We also have a HealthPartners International Development Department. That started in the late 1990s. We were approached by Land O'Lakes International Development, another Minnesota organization. They, at the time, were doing cooperative development organization in northern Uganda. They were working with agricultural co-ops. And what they saw was their ag co-op members were doing really well in terms of building up their economic stability. But as soon as they fell ill, all of that foundation would be pulled from underneath them. So Land O'Lakes came to us and said, can you use your cooperative knowledge to build a simplified cooperative model that we can use in a resource-poor location? So that's how we started. And since then, we've been creating a model that is 100% locally sustainable. It's managed 100% by local stakeholders, and it's funded 100% by local stakeholders. So that's what we've been doing. And we recently have gotten another USAID grant, excuse me. I'm getting ahead of myself. All right, so the big challenge in Uganda is this. You've got people who fall ill, but they don't want to go in for services because they don't want to pay the out-of-pocket costs because it gets really expensive. So they wait to seek treatment. By the time they seek treatment, they're very expensive. So the provider provides treatment, but now this patient can't pay for their treatment. So now both the patient is in debt as well as the provider. So you've got a system that doesn't work for either the patients or the providers. So what we do as HealthPartners is we create a mutually beneficial relationship between these two entities. So that's essentially what I'm going to be talking about in this co-op model. For those of you who don't know, a cooperative is simply a group of people that get together to meet common needs. The reason that a cooperative is different than a normal business is that A, it's member-owned, B, all decisions are made democratically, and C, in the case of profit-making cooperatives, the profit is shared amongst members. So this right here is what I'm talking about when I talk about the health co-op model. You'll see there the members and providers. That's what I was just talking about in terms of this mutually beneficial relationship. You see an arrow going from the members to the providers. So members pay a premium on a quarterly basis, and they pay a co-op to the providers. The providers, in turn, provide services to the members. That's a very basic insurance principles. This is, members actually pay less than they would pay if they're paying out of pocket, simply because you're creating a risk pool. And creating groups of members, you've got more people paying into a system than they're pulling out of the system. So it's cheaper for members, and it's more profitable for providers. Does that make sense? I'm seeing some nods. Great. Providers are also required to hire a data entrant. And the reason that they do that is because we need that data entrant to keep track of treatment costs, as well as keep track of which members have paid, so lists of members, so that they can give that information back to providers, members, and then the purple box that you see all the way on the other side is the board. So the data entrants also give that information to the board. The reason that's important is because that board is made up of members, and that board oversees the relationship between the members and the providers. Okay, so they're the ones who are making sure that members are getting the services that they've been promised, and that providers are actually making money from the system. So this system right here that I've shown you is 100% sustainable on its own. HealthPartners pays for technical assistance and training. We don't reinsure any of this. We don't provide any subsidies. We did at one point, and all we saw was that the management of the co-ops themselves really went downhill because they knew that they had something to fall back on. So we pulled any subsidies, we pulled any reinsurance, and this is now 100% sustained by the financing that comes in from the members. Benefits. So on the member side, the members get to drive essentially what kind of healthcare they get. So they get to decide what kind of premiums they're willing to pay and what kind of services they want. So they have a huge percentage of the market share, so they're able to drive the quality that the provider is even providing. Because if they don't like what the provider is providing, they can pull their business and go to another provider. In the end, what that does is it creates affordable access to all of these members, as well as improved health outcomes. On the provider side, you see that they have a steady source of revenue. Now, that steady source of revenue ensures that they can pay for doctors, they can pay for supplies, they can pay for medicines, they can actually keep their doors open, which they couldn't before. And then, like I already mentioned, they improve their quality with that consistent source of revenue, as well as from the pressure they're getting from their members to improve their quality. And then the relationship with the community was one of the things that the providers often bring up as being a really critical aspect of this relationship between providers and members. By the numbers. Just to give you a quick sense of scope of this project, there are currently 46,000 members working with 14 cooperatives and pre-cooperatives. A pre-cooperative is simply a cooperative that has yet to register with the government. They work with 31 providers and surplus. Last year, the amount that providers made over the cost of the treatment was over $100,000 US. So it is really profitable for providers. Over the life of the project, the surplus has been over $350,000. The impacts. 2 years ago, we hired an outside firm to do an impact assessment to determine whether or not what we were hearing anecdotally and seeing in our data was actually what was going on in the project. What we found out was our impact was actually greater than we thought it was. Number one, members are better protected financially, which is obviously the basis of any insurance program. That's what you want to happen. But they were half as likely to have to pay for healthcare on credit, have to borrow, or go into debt to pay for healthcare. They seek care earlier, which is really important because in Uganda, 2 of the biggest causes of death are malaria and diarrhea. Easily treatable. So if you can get those patients in to see the doctors right away, they don't turn into an issue. Then adopt preventive behaviors. Again, really important for the same issue, for the same reason. If you're washing your hands and you're sleeping under bed nets, you're going to avoid the issue. You're not going to get to the point where you have diarrhea, and you're not going to get to the point where you have malaria in general. All of these things lead to better health outcomes. We saw that the maternal and child health indices were actually improved for cooperative members over non-cooperative members. In terms of providers, this was probably the most stunning information that we got out of the impact assessment, excuse me. So this idea of cost recovery is essentially how much money are providers making over the cost of treatment. So what we found was that on average, a provider was actually losing money when they were treating non-co-op members. They were actually losing about 50 US cents per patient treated. However, when they were treating a cooperative member, they were actually making $6 US. So it was an enormous difference between when you're treating a non-cooperative member and when you're treating a cooperative member. Our providers knew that kind of anecdotally, and they've been seeing it, but they had no idea that the numbers were as extreme as they were. All right, I'm going to jump to lessons learned. So that's the co-op model in a really small nutshell. We'll move on to lessons learned in the last 5 years or so. So number one, you might laugh at the idea that this is a lesson. Find the right partner. We're so often approached by groups of people who say, we really want to start a health cooperative. And we say, awesome, we're going to train you and train you and train you. So that's what we did at the very beginning of this project. And we trained tons and tons of groups. And we saw that some of them just took off and ran, and they were amazing co-ops. And some of them really struggled. And so we said, we must have done something wrong with these co-ops that are struggling. We must not have trained them well enough, so let's pour more resources into these other co-ops. Well, we'd see that they still would just kind of be stagnant. They weren't able to get over the hump. And what we eventually found out was that they didn't really share our objective. They didn't want to have sustainable health co-ops. They had ulterior motives for being part of the project, which is fine. But when we have limited resources, we can't be pouring our resources into those who don't share our objectives. So what we started doing was saying, we really need our partners to be able to articulate their objectives, and they need to share the same project objectives that we have. And that's really important, particularly for us, because our partners drive the programming. They're the ones who set their own objectives, they're the ones who set their own plans, they're the ones who set their own indicators. So if they don't share our objectives, then they're going to be going off here when we want them to be going off here. So if they have that intrinsic motivation to be working in the same direction we want them to be working, awesome. Then we want to invest in them all the way. Lesson number 2. Incentivize results with a funding mechanism. So traditionally in development, funding is provided for inputs. So you've got a local partner, the partner says, I want to create a training around how to calculate provider surplus. And we as an implementing partner say, great, how much is it going to cost? Here's the money. I hope you achieve your objective. And then we might follow up with them. We might find out they didn't reach our objective, something to that effect. But you're essentially incentivizing activities. You're not incentivizing results. We have flipped that model so that we're now incentivizing results rather than activities. And the way that we do that is we work with our local partners to come up with essentially a list of their objectives. And then once they've got their objectives, how they're going to measure those objectives. So what are their indicators? And then we as health partners say, great, how much is that going to cost you? And that's how much money we'll give you at the end when you've achieved your objectives. And there are a number of other incentives there, but that's the really general thing. It's a really general model. Now, the reason this is important is because it, A, builds ownership. So your local partners are the ones that are driving the entire system. And B, it allows them flexibility to be able to achieve their objectives in any way they see as important. So that's the idea of using their local knowledge to be able to drive this program. I know it sounds a little bit ruthless, but the way that we implement it, it's really not, and I'll explain why. So what we do as health partners, as we're going through this process of identifying these objectives and these indicators, we're saying, what kind of skills is this local partner going to need? What kind of supplies is this local partner going to need? What kind of plans are they going to need to make? And do they have the ability to do what they want to do? And if they don't, where there are gaps, we work with them in advance of them trying to reach this objective to make sure that they have those skills, or they have those supplies, or they have whatever it is that they need prior to jumping into this activity. The second thing we do is we start small. So when we start working with a provider, or with a local partner, we set very small goals with them, obviously they're the ones setting the goals. And then we make sure that they're meeting them. And if they're meeting them, then great, we'll invest more, and then bigger and bigger. So we start small and we grow as they grow. If there's something that needs a significant capital investment in the beginning, then we work with them to kind of create baby steps so that we can make sure that they have the funds that they need. So it really is a modified results-based funding so that we make sure that they have everything they need to achieve the results that they want to achieve. Does that make sense? The only other critical factor for success is just that our partners are able to verify and measure that they've met their objectives, their indicators. And this is really actually a harder one than one might think. Monitoring and evaluation is a struggle in a lot of developing locations. And so what we do in advance of creating all of these objectives and indicators and all of these things, because these are really, for some people, they're foreign kind of concepts. We work with them on what monitoring is, what evaluation is, and make sure they have the systems in place to be able to provide the kind of indicators and the kind of verification that is necessary to be able to follow through this results-based funding. And the last lesson is right along also with Global Health 3.0. Build a network. In 2012, USAID Learning Lab came out with a research piece that was looking at the question of how do we develop and strengthen local capacity. What they found was so many of us who are INGOs working with local partners were saying, okay, if we could only improve their management, we could improve their outcomes. So that's what, so they were looking at, does that work? And what they found out was that doesn't create lasting impact. That might improve performance in the short term, but it doesn't improve performance in the long term. So they said what does improve performance in the long term is creating networks of all of these local actors. So our job as an international NGO who has probably more funding and unfortunately probably a louder voice, we're the ones who can convene all of those local NGOs, the government entities, your businesses, anybody who might be part of your kind of local environment. You're the one, we can pull them together. We have that kind of strength to be able to pull them together. So that's what we do. And in terms of operationalizing that, at HealthPartners, what we've been doing for the last three-ish years is all of our cooperatives on a quarterly basis, we bring them all together and we say, you decide on the agenda, you decide on your objective for this meeting, you decide on what you want to come out of it. All we're doing is bringing you all together. And we've seen some amazing knowledge sharing come out of that because all of these cooperatives are working with the same challenges. They're working with the same constraints. And to not talk with other people, to not talk with other cooperatives is an opportunity that's missed. So we bring all of the cooperatives together on a regular basis to have that kind of a discussion. We've learned that they can learn from each other. And it also builds up a sense of trust because the first times that we brought them together, they were like, they have no idea what I'm going through, or I don't want to give them my solution because it's working for us. I don't want them to be doing better. So there was a lot of mistrust. There was a lot of hesitation, and now we're seeing that there's a lot more confidence. There's a lot more trust. There's a lot more social, interaction. So that's really been super successful. The other thing that we're doing now is creating shared work centers. So it's great that you bring everybody together on a quarterly basis. But if they're not seeing each other on a regular basis, there's a lot that's missed. So we're creating local resource centers where cooperatives that are located regionally around, all in the same general area can come together and they work and they can leverage resources and knowledge. You see here, we're doing things like advocacy on a national level with those groups, research, making sure that they can all use, the same auditor, things like cost leverage. So that they're all able to build that network. The idea being, once we as health partners take ourselves out of the middle of that network, we should never have been in the middle of the network. Once we take ourselves out of the network, they'll all be able to continue working together. And that looks like that's it.